I had been looking for a cheaper place to live for a long time. Big cities are exhausting, and the rent prices make you feel like an eternal debtor. When I came across an ad for renting a small private house on the outskirts, I called right away. The owner, an elderly man with a hoarse voice, answered quickly and suggested meeting the same day. The house turned out to be old but quite sturdy. The wooden facade needed a coat of paint, the windows were covered in dust, and the lawn hadn't been mowed in a long time. But inside, it was cozy, old but well-maintained wooden floors, furniture from the last century, the smell of old books and something that resembled dried herbs. There were photographs on the walls, black and white, capturing different moments in the family's life. In most of the photos, there was the same old man who had greeted me at the doorstep. "Are you going away for long?" I asked him while signing the contract. "Yes," he answered after a pause. "It's just time." His voice sounded tired. He handed me the keys and left without looking back. I stood there for a long time, watching him go. The neighbors watched me through the curtains, but as soon as I met their gaze, they immediately looked away. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The first few days passed quietly. I was getting used to the new place, unpacking my things, and getting acquainted. The house, though old, was comfortable. It was quiet here, too quiet, no constant hum of traffic or shouting neighbors. At first, I even liked this silence. But soon, I started noticing oddities. One morning, I left my cup on the kitchen table and went into the living room to check my phone. When I returned a minute later, I found the cup had been moved to a different spot. I didn't pay much attention at first, thinking I must have moved it myself. But then it started happening more often. Books on the shelf would change position, the chair by the window would gently rock as if someone had just gotten up from it. What bothered me the most was the bedroom. I always closed the door at night, but every morning I found it slightly ajar. One night, I even thought I heard it creaking slowly in the dark. But the most unsettling thing was the mirror in the hallway. One night, as I was coming back from the kitchen, I caught something strange out of the corner of my eye. As I approached it, I saw a dark figure in the reflection, sitting in the chair in the living room. I quickly looked up and glanced around. There was no one there. But when I looked back at the mirror, the chair was still rocking slowly. I tried to explain it logically: drafts, fatigue, imagination. But the feeling that I was not alone in the house grew stronger. After that night, I started feeling uncomfortable. I began avoiding looking into the mirror, and I covered the rocking chair with a blanket so I wouldn't see it moving on its own. But it didn't help. Something in this house seemed to be playing with me. One evening, I heard muffled footsteps in the hallway. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to leave the bedroom. The hallway was empty. However, the air felt thick, heavy, as if a storm was coming. When I returned to the bedroom, the door slammed shut behind me. The next morning, I decided to talk to the neighbors. The first few doors didn't open. Finally, an elderly woman came out. She looked me over carefully, then lowered her voice and said, "You need to leave. This house, it's not empty." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. The owner, he didn't want to leave. He was lonely. Always said the house was his only real place. When they found him, the woman hesitated. He was sitting in the chair, as if he'd just dozed off. But his eyes, they were open. I felt the ground give way beneath my feet. At that moment, I realized, everything that had been happening in the house wasn't just a figment of my imagination. He was truly still here. And he wasn't going to let me go. After my conversation with the neighbor, I decided it was time to leave. I packed my things and headed for the front door, but it wouldn't open. The lock wouldn't budge, as if it was jammed. I tried the windows, they were all tightly shut. Fear began to slowly creep up my spine. I was trapped inside. I dialed the owner's number, but he didn't answer. Then I called my friends, but the connection suddenly started failing. All I could hear in the receiver was static and whispers, as if someone was repeating my words. That night, the situation worsened. The house was filled with the sound of creaking footsteps, rustling noises, and from behind the bedroom door came the steady sound of breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself that it was all just my imagination. But then the bed beneath me suddenly jolted, as if someone had forcefully pushed it from below. I jumped up and rushed to the door, but it was still locked. At that moment, a soft, raspy voice whispered behind me. "You weren't supposed to come here." I slowly turned around. In the rocking chair sat a silhouette, blurry, as if woven from shadow. Its empty eyes were staring directly at me. I could no longer stay in this house. No matter what, I had to escape, or else he would never let me go. Everything inside froze. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The dark silhouette in the chair continued to stare at me with its empty eyes. A thought flashed through my mind: if I don't get out now, I'll stay here forever. I lunged for the door and started pulling the handle with all my strength. Useless. Then I grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it at the window with all my might. The glass shattered, and the shards fell to the floor. Ignoring the pain from the cuts, I climbed outside. As soon as my feet hit the ground, the house behind me shuddered. Through the howling wind, I heard a piercing scream, not human, terrifying, filled with rage. I ran without looking back. When I finally reached the road, my heart was pounding wildly. I stopped, turned around. The house stood motionless, as if nothing had happened. No silhouette, no movement, just an old house, enveloped in the darkness of the night. The next morning, I returned with the owner of the house. Everything inside was just as it had been, no sign of my chaotic escape. But on the floor, right by the rocking chair, was one thing I had never seen before, an old, faded photograph. In it was that same silhouette. And next to it, me. I left and never returned to that town. But sometimes, when I fall asleep, I swear I still hear that raspy voice. You weren't supposed to come here.